to speak about migration, climate change, adaptation, and resilient cities. What linkages? So why is this topic in the focus? Why that? I mean, we hear about the topic of resilience all the time. It's a term, it's a buzzword. So it's all over the place. And a very basic definition we used in our announcement of the webinar is, it is a concept that acknowledges the capacity of individuals, communities, and systems to survive, adapt, and grow in the face of stress and shocks. So in a way, we do shift our attention away from the more vulnerable people to those who can make it. So we must be clear about that. It is about attempts to cope with difficult circumstances. And we are not looking on those who cannot make it for whatever reason. So this is first point. But we could say it's the more positive way to understand how we can cope with difficult situations. And on the other hand, we see that migration and resettlement are still mostly seen as a reaction on such shocks and a consequence of natural disasters, for example. We see concepts like trapped populations speaking about people who cannot make it to move away from a place which is endangering their life. And then we speak of trapped populations, but that could be also slightly victimizing. So we have to be careful about the words we use, and we have to understand under which constellations, under which conditions, migration and mobility can work as enablers of adaptation, as a sustainable, as sustainability, as a resilient strategy for communities, for example. So we think, or Vivi and I, when we designed this international lecture, this webinar, we thought that could be a way to approach the topic. And we are increasingly confronted with processes of very slow onset environmental change. So processes we do not notice at first hand, but which are increasingly considered also in migration research. So we speak of slow onset dynamics. And please have here an example for such. It's a picture from Semarang. I took some years ago, and you can see this is the end of what we would consider as a slow onset process, which in the end has a very harsh consequence for the person, for that woman living in that house. So I want to come up with some words on big numbers, and then say why I think we should much more focus on the analytics, on the dynamics. And there's another point I want to raise before I come to because when we speak about the big lines, big developments, we must see what is on our mind. Why is it important to include the Sustainable Development Goals? Because we must have some sort of counterbalance to the more economic thinking, which is still there. So we have, for example, for the Asian context, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership since last year. So this is a huge, it's an agreement for a huge part of the world population. And we have to be clear that there are relatively weak regulations when it comes to questions of environmental protection. We have relatively weak regulations on human rights, on gender, all that things which on the ground are important to have a sustainable development. So, and all of the speakers we hear today are part of this region, of those countries involved into that. I promised we would concentrate on the big numbers. And here now excuse me, it's not, here we go. I just checked the last IOM report. IOM is the International Organization for Migration, and they come up with all kinds of data. And just for you to have an idea on about how many people we speak, you can see that we have a very large part of the international migrant workers in the Asia Pacific region. We have growing numbers. We have about 40% of all migrant workers women. We have 17% of all refugee and asylum seekers all over the world. 17% are from Asia, from this region. And yeah, the governance of migration is part of resilience. This is getting clear if we look on the numbers. What is normally seen, or how can we measure who is moving due to migration or in combination or caused by climate change? We normally have this major disasters, internal displacement. And there we have also, you can find this in the report, you have classically the typhoons or the floodings making people move, but those people come back after a certain time. So that is not so much about migration, because migration implies that the movement is continuing and taking place over time. People change where they live. What we don't see in that disaster pictures is what the slow onset effects are, and they are getting to be more important. The last IPCC report showed that very clearly, that the slow onset processes will be the more important ones in the next years. And the IOM report comes up with scenarios and projects the number of internal climate migrants in South Asia with three different scenarios. And it sees climate migrants as a percentage of the total population, which is rising anyway. Also, if we take measurements, which we must at this point. So why do I mention this? The IOM report shows us that we have 2 years ago, and even more, I guess, last year, and this year will be a hot year also, the highest number of weather-related displacements. And it was one of the 3 warmest on the record in the world. And rising global temperatures have triggered more frequent and severe weather events. You know that, you feel that, all of us feel that. On the other hand, we have the Sustainable Development Goals, and here we see the target number 1, and poverty in all its forms everywhere, as a counterbalance to the economic goals we of course see for many countries. And the hope here is with goal 1.5, that we can end the vulnerable situations, also due to environmental shocks and disasters. And also goal number 11, make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, will not do without considering migration. And so this is a very global perspective. And what I think we should do as academics and as interested people, we should go away from that normative policy perspective, which we need, but which doesn't explain what is happening on the ground. And this is why Vivi and we did invite scholars who do research and who try to understand what is going on below the radar. So our focus is now on the analysis of the situation. And to do this, we use case studies. So we go away from the global and we zoom into the processes on the ground. And to do so, we hope we can do so, because that is very tricky. Research is not an easy thing to do. And to explain what you see. To do that, we do it as always. So same procedure as every year. Each speaker has about 10 to 12 minutes to speak about her or his case. And then today we have a discussion of about 30 minutes with questions, answers, and discussion. I mean, we want to enhance the discussion. And who are the speakers? And I'm so glad we could win great speakers today. We have first, we start with Dr. Sariffudin. He's a doctoral candidate at Radboud University in the Netherlands. He's in the Department of Urban Regional Planning in Diponegoro University, Indonesia. We have also the doctoral candidate, Mada Sophianingrum. She's also at Diponegoro, but she's a doctoral candidate at the Université Paris Diderot in France. Hello to both of you. And then we have Dr. Naim Laeni. He's at the Faculty of Political Science at Thammasat University in Thailand. And we welcome Vivi Setso Asis. She's at the Dr. Mala Asis. She's at the Scalabrini Migration Center in the Philippines. So she's speaking about the Philippines. And so this is the program. And I would give the word now to Dr. Sariffudin, please. I stop my presentation. Please just jump in.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. And especially thank you for Professor Felicitas and also Professor Wiwandari and Laeni for this opportunity to share our ongoing research about housing behavior responding to coastal floodways. And this is only this is our first paper of 4 planned papers. This is about housing displacement and replacements in coastal flood-prone area. Okay, and in this research, we try to understand the behavior of housings responding to coastal flood risk to support market-based instrument for flood risk management. So here we try to understand how they respond in terms of property price and also location adjustment. So in this perspective, we argue that the active role of property market should be considered to support spatial adaptation or spatial planning as a key instrument for flood risk management or FRM. In FRM or flood risk management itself, we can explain it according to 2 approaches, namely hydrological approaches and also spatial adaptations. The main idea in hydrological approaches is keeping water away from land through engineering defense, such as building a dike, embankments, and dam and something like that. However, when we talk about spatial adaptations, the main idea is we avoid flood risk area. So here, migration or relocation is necessary in our perspective. When we talk about spatial planning or spatial adaptations, it is we can explain it from the government sides and also from property markets or market sides. And here, if we talk about government sites, it's usually experienced in lock situations. For example, in Indonesia, for example, we revise the master plan, RTRW, for example, or perhaps RDTRK, detailed engineering land use plans. We revise every 5 years. However, flooding comes every years, so we need flexible instruments. Perhaps market-based instrument could be considered as a flexible instrument to manage the land use. So from the urban studies point of view, we can understand that I think it is very possible that individual voluntary displacement to avoid flood-prone area could be considered as property market active role in supporting spatial adaptation. So actually, there are a lot of previous research, including research conducted by Professor Imam Bukhari in Semarang, that concludes they migrate to adapt and also to anticipate the flood risk. However, what we don't see from the previous research is whether they migrate in permanent or in temporary, because most previous research use questionnaire data and also interview data. Therefore, we use land and building tax history to make sure that they pay a tax, so we can generalize that they move permanently, or as a permanent host-based allocations. There are two underpinning theory to explain the effective private adaptations. We use individual equilibrium theory and cost-benefit model here. In our perspective, when we talk about housing displacement, this is only one adaptation strategy of household as economic agent. So we see them as economic agent to adjust their housing consumption. Housing consumption here, how they take advantage for the locational quality within their budget constraints. And then when we talk about residential mobility, there are three conceptual model, life cycle model, cost benefit model, and neighborhood change model. However, because these three has a financial consequence, so Professor Brasington from UK, they argue that these three model could be reduced into a cost benefit model, and this is the theoretical the conceptual framework. When because adaptation is part of marginal cost, and when the marginal costs increase, each household will experience the decrease of marginal benefits and also marginal externalities. Therefore, they try to looking for a new equilibrium to make a balance their expenditure. As we already know, elevating the house or at least the floor is part of marginal cost. They have to expend their money. And this is the data that I use. We use building tax history and multinomial logistical regressions. We use data from 1993 until to 2020. However, because we only have transaction data from 2015, so we just split into 2015 until 2020. And then to see the correlation between coastal flood risk variable to the decision, their decision to displace, we use multinomial logistical regressions. Here we use property price as observe variable. And this is the situations in Pekalongan in North Java. Actually, there are 4 kinds displacement. The household displaced from safe to risk area, from risk to risk area, and then risk to safe area. And then the last is the household who displaced from safe to safe area. However, because we only focus on risk, coastal flood risk, so we exclude the safe to safe displacements. And this is the findings from Mercy Corps. They did research about the flood risk perception according to 5 indicators, and they drew a conclusion that all indicators show that they have low risk perception. And this is if we try to compare between their decision with coastal flood risk variables. Actually, there is evidence that the abandoned area are not being left by the property market. So the property market still exists in flood-prone area. It means that some people, group people, in this case, low-income people, become a new customer in coastal flood risk area. So the middle-income people move from risk to safe area and then replaced by low-income people. So we can imagine this. We can imagine the flood-prone area inhabited by low-income people. So yeah, we can see this is a resilience situation or not. And we try to observe the property price here to see the correlations between coastal flood risk variable and the decisions. We can see risk to safe displacement is for middle income people and safe to risk displacement is low income people. When we exclude the property price, only middle income people has a statistically significance with a p-value less than 0.05. However, when we add the property price here, almost all variable is significant. This is, I think, what can we learn from this situation? This is the picture about the property price is a mediator variable. So actually, the people there do not recognize the risk, but they only recognize the property price. So property price is a mediator. Therefore, I think this is not surprise when Mercy Corps drew the conclusion that the people living there has low risk perception. Because why? Because yeah, what they think is money, property price. Property price is the most important because this is the mediator variable. So what can we learn from here? I think we can signaling the risk through the property price. So this is the conclusions. I hope 10 minutes is enough for me. Yeah, so this is housing displacement and replacement, which is housing behavior in response to slow onset flooding. I think should be considered as a flexible instrument to support flood risk management, especially to support spatial adaptation. And I think there is a growing evidence that the property price determine the decision to displace. So yeah, perhaps because we know they have a low risk perception, so we can signaling the risk through the price. And then market-based instrument perhaps should be considered for autonomous adaptation in spatial adaptation. However, we have limitations in our study, especially in data, because we do not have income data. We only use electricity subscription as a proxy data to show the income. And also yeah, I think there are several questions remains, such as whether displacement influence the environmental situations, because low income people means they have low capacity in self-repair and also to maintain the neighborhoods. Yeah, thank you, Professor Felicitas and Professor Wiwit.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sariffudin. And I think it reminded me to the point that all of us just tend to not see the costs of environmental degradation. So this seems to be a global thing. But I keep all my questions for the discussion later. Thank you so much. I would like to hand over immediately to Mada. Mada, please take the floor. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Felicitas and Prof. Wiwi and all the audience. Okay, I would like to share my, actually this is like slightly my research, because my research is more about the rural migration, but I try to slightly has what is like the relation between the migration and the climate change. The title is the Linking Climate Change to Livelihood Strategy, the Role of Rural Migration. I took the case in the three region in Kendal, Klaten, and Wonosobo. Okay, wait a minute. Yeah. So, basically, if we talk about the climate change and the migration, I would like to say that the climate change may be one of the reason to move, because I cannot slightly state it clear in my case. It's really the reason to move, because if we try to see from the longitudinal study that I took before, sometimes the reason to move is not only the climate change, because there are so many factors that affected. For example, there are the moratorium of the migration policy in Indonesia, or we have also the global impact for the bomb petrolier, and all of them bring together. So maybe I cannot directly say that this is like one of the reasons to move, but I try to slightly see in my empirical study, is it one of the reasons to move or not? So the rural migration itself related to the agricultural condition in rural development. We can see that from the FAO, this recent study from FAO say that there are six major factors that affected the people to move. The first is about the poverty and food security. We have also lack of employment, service gaps, and then social security access. And then there are two main reasons actually why the people move, is about the global climate change and also the depletion of the natural resources. So I try to figure it out these two points from the FAO, and then I try to combine and compare from my empirical data. And it says that the climate change has a major impact for the people in the rural area, especially residents who work as a farmer, because it's happened the long dry season caused drought, so that so many agricultural land fail to harvest. I found that in the case in the Sragen. And then also their change in rain pattern affected the cropping pattern. And I found this case in the village in Kendal and Wonosobo. So I try to compare these three regions become one integrated cases to have the linkages between the climate change and the migration. So this is my method. Actually, I conduct the method basically as a participant observer, because I stay directly in the village. In Wonosobo, it's a region with the agricultural activity with the commodity is rice field and the forest. And then with the migration characteristic is a woman in the productive ages, and then international migrant. Almost of them is international migrants. And then I conduct the interview with 40 respondents, which is like a migrant, family migrant, or non-migrant. And then I do the participant observer and stay during 6 months in the rural area. So I become the participant observer with using the ethnographic method. For Sragen, actually, this is the region with the agricultural activity more. Most of them is a rice field and horticulture, because they do the crop diversification. And then I use, actually, this is based on I use it as a team in a research with my student and my colleague. And I interview 35 respondent, migrant, family and non-migrant, and we only like stay in only like 2 months in the rural area. And then for the Kendal, actually, this is like a bonus. I can see this is the region bonus, because I not quite sure. Is it Wonosobo and Sragen can what is it? Enlighten my hypothesis. So I try to see another region near Semarang to see, is it like is it any relation for the environmental and the migration. So I took Kendal as my third region. So this region is more in agricultural activity, and I choose the region with the salad based commodity. So only the region, the village with the salad commodity. And then I only interview with 10 respondents, because it's only like triangulation from what I got before. And then I only stay 1 week there, and as a participant observer also. So basically, this is the way I collect my data and the method of my research. So it's more like a direct participation, and I get the qualitative data. So this is the framework and a general finding. I really try to make it concise, because not so easy to try to figure out the three regions become together. So I make the adaptation from the sustainable livelihood approach that very famous from Alice, and then many researchers try to revisit it and then use it and then try to make it in another context. And I use it by combine the case study in Sragen, because in the Sragen I can see the variation of the livelihood strategy. So based on the empirical data that I found, we found in Sragen, actually there the vulnerability risks happen there. The price volatile and then pandemic, because it's a recent study. But we also found two vulnerability risks linkages with the climate shock, the drought and the flood. And based on these two, we try to figure it out. Actually, they have also the limitation in their livelihood asset, because only like narrow farmland, lack of capital, lack of skill, lack of asset and access, a limitation for all the community there. And then based on these two characteristics, they try has the tendency to do the livelihood strategy. And the livelihood strategy that they do is a migration, crop diversification, and job diversification. But I can slightly highlight in this livelihood strategy that they tend to choose the first, migration, as their point to choose or to do the other strategy. Because by using the migration, they can get the remittance, and then they can minimize the vulnerability risk. And then after that, they can get the more increase the asset, and then they can make the coping strategy for the other, means that the crop diversification or job diversification. So basically my research, or sorry, I will share in this kind of framework for another finding, and I will make in more detail for this. Wait. Okay, so the first linkages is about the, I cannot say climate change, because I don't have like longitudinal data to say that is it really climate change or only shock, or like it's a disaster. I'm sorry, I use the terminology climate shock. And then this is like climate shock because it's happened recently 5 years, 5, not until 10 years, because I don't have data until 10 years and even 20 years longitudinal data. But it's happened like recently. And this case is in Sragen and Kendal. So based on our observation, we found that during the rainy season, there are it's flooding. The area is flooding, and all the rice field is inundated, and then it happens like the crop failure, and they cannot. The agriculture is shocked, and then for surviving, or maybe like the part of the adaptation from the farmer, they make like a puddles around the paddy field to anticipate the flooding. But this strategy needs a cost, so not all the farmer can do this. So maybe this part is very interesting, because yeah, we need another cost to deal with it. Meanwhile, during the dry season, there are drought. So the drought occurs due to the characteristic of the soil, and then for surviving or adapt with this situation, the farmer also has to construct the submersible well. It also need the cost to do that. So I try to figure out, means that because of the climate shocks, the agricultural costs increase, and then it will reduce the agricultural productivity. So they don't have any choice to make the coping strategy, and then they choose the migration as the first door to do the coping strategy, because it's like not, you don't have to pay many things, yeah. And the characteristic of the agricultural household is has a very strong relation. For example, the limited agricultural land, lack of asset, and high number of family, because after that they have to divide the land into many of the number of family, and then low education. So they they choose the migration as the option for the financing the agriculture by sending remittance. And then the migration flow will increase because the agriculture no longer become the main activity for their income. And then the migrant tend to buy land for minimizing the vulnerability risk in agriculture. Okay, so another linkages that I try to compare is the migration pattern. So this is the case in Sragen. I found that the situation happened in the changes in the agricultural condition due to the shock of the climate will shaping the migration pattern in the rural area. For example, the first is the circular migration with the pattern ABABA. So they only like go back, what is like go and back, go and back, go and back like that. The same origin and the same destination. And then it's happened in the first generation of the migration. Sorry, first generation of the migrants. So due to changes in agricultural condition, the migration pattern is developed, and they have the longer duration. They have the farther destination because of this climate shock. So because before, if there are no drought and there's no flood, they can like while waiting the crops season, so they can go leave the village, but only like relatively close so that they can easily return. But because of the drought, because of the flood, they cannot no longer option. So the pattern become changes, the longer duration and the farther destination. It happens also in the second generation for the migration pattern ABACA, because after the first generation can secure or maybe like can survive from the agriculture, they tend to go abroad, or maybe like we can say that they can go more farther and the longer duration because they need to buy land, because they tend to buy land as their maybe like tools for increasing the resilience of their sustainable their livelihood. So in this circular migration pattern, they tend to use the remittance not only for financing the agricultural activity, but also to increase their ability, or maybe increase their resilience in the agricultural activity. Okay, so another things about the linkages is about the migration trajectory. It's the case is in Wonosobo. I have a chance to see it in the very broad longitudinal data, because I can interview with somebody from the 1970s to the migration, and I try to make it in the several several stages in migration: initiation, development, and acceleration. For the initiation phase in this rural area, they have very slightly influence from the climate shocks. For example, because they suffer from the long drought, so that they cannot stay longer. They don't have choice. They cannot do the agriculture because it's a long drought, and the farmer choose to migrate because they don't have land ownership, lack of the land ownership, and the high cost in land cultivating. So they choose to migrate, and this actually is not only climate shocks that happen in this time, because if you can see from 1978 until 1980, Indonesia has the migration policy, we call it transmigration. So with the kind of climate change shock, and then they have the policy of the transmigration, it's integrated together, and then so many people decided to go because they will get land in the destination area. But after in 1989 in this region, the government has a construction of the reservoir, so it will be reduce the vulnerability of the agriculture. So there's a change in the trajectory of the migrant itself, because they they tend to go abroad due to the ability to buy agricultural land. Then they go only in as a transmigrant or go to the what is like a Lampung, Sulawesi, or etc. So they choose to go abroad because of this kind of like for we can say that they have already survived, so they need to develop, so they need to go abroad to make more ability to this. Okay, so yeah. The last one is the linkages. I can see that the remittance as a leverage. Maybe this is like slightly that I want to propose and discuss actually, because I'm sorry, I forget to traduce in English. Okay, so if I can see this in this part, this is the migration trajectory happen in the rural area. The first is, if you can see from rural, go to Singapore, go to Taiwan, it's a trajectory for the husband. If you can see in this side, in the left side. Contrary in the what is right side is the trajectory, migrant trajectory that happened for the wife. So this is the household, migrant household. So we can see from the longitudinal or the timeline, they tend to go abroad, or it's like shifting. They shift the time when they go abroad, because they still need somebody stay in the village to cultivate the land. So this is the main reason why the migration trajectory became very maybe slightly what is integrated with the climate shocks, because yeah, the agriculture still become the focus why the people migrate and why the people stay, because they still not cultivate the land, or maybe something happened with the agricultural activity. So in this what is okay, so in this yeah, for in this case, this is like I can see this is the remittance pattern that happened in Wonosobo. I'm sorry.
Mada,
Yes.
you have another minute left. You run out of
Okay.
time. Okay.
Okay. This is the last one. So I will say that the remittance become the leverage. Why? Because this is the first thing they send remittance to finance the agricultural activity. And then after that, they tend to buy land because they need to minimize the vulnerability. And after that, actually, this is why the remittance become the leverage or things that very important in this case. Okay. Wait. Okay. So this is my conclusion. So the climate change has slightly linkages with rural migration through the agricultural dynamic. And migration as a form of adaptation strategy is a method to increase livelihood security through sending remittance. And the migration pattern is one of the linkages between the climate change and migration. In the long period, it will shape the migration trajectory due to the lack of, the agricultural land ownership. And then the last one at the end, I can see that the linkages is cyclic. So it's not only like one direct, but it's a cyclic. Why? Because after the agricultural is survive, they will tend to do the migration itself, and then it's like cyclic. So because another research, my research continue of my research is that they tend to move more close with their rural, for example, the small town near the village. Okay, that's all for me. Thank you very much, and I expected very well discussion after. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mada, for your presentation on this invisible side of migration. So remittances and the gender division in the households. Without further ado and words, I want to hand over to our next presenter, which is Dr. Naim Laeni. May I ask you to jump in with your presentation? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Felicitas, and Professor Wiwi invited me to share experience and case study on Thailand regarding climate adaptation and the linkage between the migration. Let me share my slide.
It is open.
I click here. I hope you see my presentation.
You must go on the full screen. Isn't that possible?
Yeah, I will do that in a moment.
Great, we can see it. Just because
Yeah.
it's an awkward situation if you're there. Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
To admit, my research is not directly related with the migrations and the linkage between climate change and adaptation and migration. So I even though in this morning I gave a lecture on migration and global governance, but my research focused mainly on Bangkok climate risks and the need for serious climate adaptations. But nevertheless, I share this presentation to you more from experience of the case study and the city like Bangkok. And to give a short conclusion, it's difficult to talk about migration in the case of a big city like Bangkok. But we show you nevertheless, there are discussions, there are debates about how Bangkok, especially like metropolitan cities, have a discussion or linkage between addressing climate risks, but also thinking about the climate adaptations. So to show you, I think the first discussion when we talk about migration of the city of Bangkok, I think we have to mention again the 2011 Bangkok floods. It was one of the historical flood events closest to our contemporary flood events in 2011. And it was the worst flood event in 30 years. And we have not yet that magnitude of flood events since then. So this is one of the first events that sparked a discussion about migration and the movement of the people outside of the city. And there are two different stands of debate regarding migration or not. So I think that when this situation happened, and unsurprisingly or surprisingly, the market price of the property price in the northern part of Thailand, for example, provinces like Chiang Mai and Mae Hong Son and Chiang Rai, those market price increased rapidly after this events, and people were asking, oh, what happened to these places? I think that the event in 2011's flooding make a shock in terms of how people think about relocation and also think about where they will get retired. I think this is one of the events that sparked discussions and ongoing discussion about the relocation of the people and going up to the north. But that's all just one stance of the debate. But another stance of the debate, if you look at this picture closely and you see that the inner city of Bangkok are quite well protected in terms of this size of flooding. So there are a lot of studies mentioning about the inner city of Bangkok quite being protected. So it means that people who live in inner cities tend to forget the flood risks because they are being protected. They are inside the barriers and dikes and different construction flood barrier. So in another sense that when we talk about migration in Bangkok, it's still unimaginable. It's like, yes, how can we imagine that? You know, because the inner cities are quite protected, even though the surrounding area were flooded. But when the inner city are protected, then people tend to forget about the flooding situations. I show you this picture. It's was the magnitude of the flooding in 2011. And I will show you another picture of drought. But if we look at this picture in the map, we see this is the high magnitude of flooding. So it's quite a serious event that spark a discussion to move, not yet to move the capital. I have another picture of moving the capital, but this is more on like spark a discussion and realizing that there is a flood risk at the coastal level and near Bangkok. there's a power dimension here because people who live in Bangkok are quite, their feet are dry. And this is, but other area are occurring flooding. So it's happening every year, especially in this, I would highlight here. So, okay, especially this area, it's it's in Thai, it's Ayutthaya province. And this area has a flooding events almost every year, and also the drought event. But if you ask me, do people move? And I would say, no, it's people still staying at the same place. And even though there's flooding each year, some people can adapt, but some people still cannot adapt to it. So they're relying on the help and the funding from the government. And it's not just Ayutthaya province, Ang Thong, Suphanburi, Singburi, the provinces that happening annual flooding. We call it annual flooding. And it's happened 3 months per year. So it's not like small flooding, but it's happened 3 months per year. Still people in the area live and relying on the government helps. And I think it's also cultural in Thailand, so to speak, right? Cultural in Thailand that people tend not to leave the house or relocate the area. They feel that they want to stay in the area. They don't want to uproot their community and live somewhere else. But this is not just, this is a picture of flooding, but this is a picture of drought. The same area in the same year, this is the red zone, the drought that happen quite regularly. So the frequency of the droughts in this area, also the Ayutthaya province, and the orange area are also happening of droughts quite seriously, but not that often comparing to the red mark. And also the upper north regions also are affected by droughts. In Thailand, we're facing 2 crises at the same time, and it's difficult to manage both problem at the same time because when you save too much water, you get the problem of flooding. But if you release too much water, you get the problem of droughts. And people tend to, I would say it's difficult to say that people move outside or relocate because during the drought seasons, they're also still relying on the government support and government assist on their agriculture. And it's also political reasons because the recent government and also recent political leader and also government tried to doing as much as possible to have a water for agriculture and shorten the drought period. So if the government and the water management agency, Royal Irrigation Agency cannot provide, then they will try to do as much as possible, including use underground water, including to diverting water, saving water, to keep this area as functional as agriculture. And there's also a recent report, an assessment report, and 2 reports also presenting the flood risks in Bangkok. And I think we know here, right? I don't have to explain that the increasing risks are evidence, participation is getting intensified, and also the raining period getting more intense and varied. So it's difficult to predict. And I think it's also this situation are still raising the question whether and how Bangkok will cope with the flooding events. And I will show you, and this is also the prediction from the university and from the different scholar predicting different modeling that the cities are getting flooded. But still, Professor, not much discussion about migrating the city yet. So as academia, we would like, oh, we would scare already, or we would present this already. But still, the problem is that discussion about the flooding, it's not in that major debate, not in policy discourse, even though we have a discussion, we have a data, how to deal this situation, it's still not there in the political agenda and the policy agenda. Even though we have a scientific discussion and we have a report about this. So when the way that the government deal with the problem, it's still using the same measures. So using a flood infrastructure, using the water management, drainage infrastructure, saving the water. So these are the current mechanism, and I think it makes sense because this is their role of the government. Right? They have a different department who are dealing with drainage the water, to push the water, to save the water, to maintain the canals. So I think this is what the government did quite strongly in the past, right? That they try to keep the water clean, they try to get the waste outside of the river. This is the old picture, but I think they do better now with the new governor because they're quite serious in terms of investment, the policy into the maintaining of the river. So I think we are not there yet. I think Indonesia is more advanced than Bangkok in the discussion about. So I also conducting. I'm not doing research, but I also do a small workshop and asking people about asking a group of participants about we're using a adaptation pathway as a method and trying to have them as an exercise, design exercise, and asking them there are multiple ways of adaptations and there are multiple ways of mitigations, and the result of the assignments also, I think the closest one to the migration is land adjustment. So adjustment of the land, adjustment of the area, and to bring space for more water. But still, there are challenges here because land adjustment in Thailand require national government law. So the ministry has to issue a special decree for land adjustment. In that sense, the government has the power to relocate the population. Okay, I think that's the tools that we are discussing. If we can readjust the land, it has to go through the process from the top down. So from the ministry, especially Ministry of Interior, and Ministry of Interior and Town Planning and Interior. So but that's still challenging, okay, because when we're talking about relocation or migration or moving people away, there tend to be a lot of resistance, okay, resistance for the community. So in order to design policy regarding to migration or adjustment of the land, it's still facing a lot of resistance because they tend to stay there and they feel that they're protected by the flooding, even though they don't want to move because they have a government assistant, they have an NGO assistant for them to stay there. So I think when this is part of my research to try to integrate different strategy, different resilience strategy into a discussion of the city management strategy. And I think when we talk about resilience strategy, it's not just about changing of the physical environment. I think it's partly also thinking of different alternative and different term, different mechanism to think about a resilient and spatial transformation. So I think this is my ongoing research to think about resilient spatial transformation. And I think migration would be an interesting topic as well, so I can learn more from this discussion. I try to evaluate different options for adaptation. And I think it's more than just building and planting, right? And this is the quote here. I think this is more than building and planting. So I think we have to think about migration, also land adjustment. But the question for me is how to make people accept, like I told you, right, the culture, the value that people tend to stay in their home, in their hometown or home place. So I think we have to extend beyond discussion of that and try to think and to try to understand the culture. People not even migrate temporarily, so evacuation even difficult in Thailand. So I think it's interesting to look at that spatial transformation, but also looking at different adaptation options in terms of climate adaptation, especially in Bangkok. And when we think about land adjustment, when we think about readjustment of the community and planning, I think we cannot deny the question about migrations. So I hope I share some of the perspective and share of some of the viewpoint and experience from Bangkok case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Naim. That was just another perspective. So we have somewhat very different approaches to the topic, and I appreciate that a lot. And I was enjoying your talk because what you said about the role of infrastructures, we were discussing this earlier with Vivi also in another webinar, when we looked on the role of dikes or the infrastructures which is set up. And I appreciate your idea to bring in more soft strategies also to look on what people would say and what can be done or should not be done top down. I think that is a very important question. And we can speak about that in the discussion. We have a next speaker, our last speaker, and she's a very famous speaker, I would say. It's Mala Asis from the Scalabrini Migration Center in the Philippines. And Mala, please, this is your turn.
Yes, thanks very much, Felicitas and Wiwi, and good day to everyone. I'll try to share my slides now. Okay.
Looks good. Just
1 moment, I have to make some adjustments.
You just have to put it full screen. Thanks. Perfect. We can see all.
All right. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to share our work. So this is actually a report that was already published and made available last July 2022. And I was listening very closely to the earlier presentations, and actually I could resonate with each of the case studies that have been presented. But I guess the last presentation about the flooding in Bangkok reminds me very much about the situation and reality that we often have to face here in Metro Manila as well. So I think there's really a great deal of value in the sharing of all these case studies, because there's really a great possibility that we can learn from each other's experiences. So in this research, in this presentation, I'll be sharing some highlights from research that we did in Baguio City, which is a highly urbanized city in the Cordillera region in the northern part of the Philippines. So this exploratory research is actually part of a broader research program that was under the aegis of the GIZ, under their program on human mobility in the context of climate change. And the Philippines was one of the countries that participated in this project. So the fieldwork for this project was conducted between November 2019 and February 2020. So just before the pandemic struck us. As earlier presented, migration and climate change is a nexus, and conceived as such, we can look at the migration either as an independent variable, that is, migration as one of the factors that could contribute to climate change, and largely because of the influx of people that can exert pressure on the environment, which might lead to certain types of climate change. But alternatively, climate change can also be a precursor of migration. And this was the presentation that was made, for example, I think the first two presentations talked a lot about climate change being the independent variable and contributing to or triggering to out-migration. But also, interestingly, I found it very insightful that when we think of the migration and climate change nexus, particularly as presented by the earlier speakers, the nexus cannot be the nexus can also be viewed beyond just beyond population mobility, beyond people moving or being displaced because of climate change. So, for example, the climate change and migration nexus, as considered in the work of Mada, was largely migration largely worked as adaptation, in the sense that one or two members of a family can be sent out outside of the community so that they can contribute through remittances, and remittances can also be a way to increase the resilience or adaptability of families, particularly in rural areas, to deal with climate change. In the literature, we've seen how, if we consider climate change as the independent variable leading to migration, there had been a lot of work that would show that there are differences, when we are talking about slow onset events such as drought, increasing temperature, and loss of the biodiversity. The displacement that could take place could be relatively more permanent, and there could be long-term population displacement, as opposed to rapid onset events such as floods and storms, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions, wherein the movement or displacement could be relatively short-term. In the case study that we have done in the city of Baguio, the approach that we made, or the framework that we worked on, is really to consider climate change as an independent variable that might trigger outmigration. So we were working largely in the area of perceptions of climate change, and whether understandings and notions of climate change, specifically slow onset events, might contribute to outmigration from Baguio City. This kind of question was kind of counterintuitive in the case of Baguio City, because it is a site of intense in-migration. So throughout its history, particularly from the early 1900s to the present, Baguio City is a major destination area, not only in the Cordillera region, but also inviting in-migration coming from other parts of the Philippines as well. And also it's a site of great mobility because it's a major tourist destination. So in framing this particular study and framing climate change as contributing to migration, it was quite challenging to carry out the data collection, because migrants and residents alike in Baguio City were so used to considering Baguio as a migration magnet rather than as a site, a potential site for outmigration. So the report that I just told you about covers 4 major themes, namely migration motivations, with special attention to the role of environment-related reasons, if any, in the motivations to migrate to Baguio. Then we also examined views and perceptions on the migration environment nexus in general, and migration climate change nexus in particular. And we also did a lot of review on the policies and actions of the city government of Baguio City on environment-related policies, and particularly also on climate change. And then we also probed future migration intentions and trends, specifically probing views on slow onset events and their implications for outmigration from Baguio City. So the primary data collection took place between November 2019 and February 2022, and primary data were collected largely through key informant interviews and focus group discussions for respondents comprising different types of migrants, family members of migrants, and stakeholders representing various sectors. Baguio City is also a very interesting site for examining the issue of governance, because it is one of the cities in the Philippines that show a very good record of governance. And also it is a city where the citizens are relatively quite active in pushing for change and pushing for reforms and policies in their city. Just before the case study was conducted, there was actually a study of the city's carrying capacity. And what we hope to contribute in this particular case study is to provide data based on the views and understandings of migrants, residents, local government officials, and representatives of community organizations. So the main source of data for the case study were drawn from 76 research participants, who took part in various data collection activities. So the distribution of participants is summarized in this slide. Next. So where is Baguio City? Baguio is one of 2 cities and 6 provinces that comprise the Cordillera Administrative Region in northern Philippines. The Cordillera Administrative Region is a landlocked and highland region which is sparsely populated, except in the case of Baguio City. I will have to skip many interesting details, but I would just like to stress that migration then and now has played an important role in shaping Baguio into a migration hub and what has become a dynamic multicultural city. During the American colonial period, Baguio was established as a hill station. It became a rest and recreation area for the American forces and personnel in the Philippines in the early 1900s because of its cool climate and beautiful scenery. It was planned as a city for 25,000 to 30,000 population, but this ideal population has been breached many decades ago. Okay. So these are some of the details, important details about Baguio. So it's a highland area, it's highly urbanized. And as you can see, as of 2019, the projected population is already close to 370,000 population. And the population density in 2019, as you can see there, is that there are 6,386 persons per square kilometer. So Baguio's population has definitely ballooned, and the high population density is an indication of how many people occupy a small land area. Okay, sorry. So this is Baguio, two sides of Baguio in 1909. So if a picture can tell 1,000 words, the black and white picture shows Baguio in the early 1900s and Baguio as we know it now. So it's, as you can see from the picture, it's highly congested already. Okay. So migration is a key driver in the population growth of Baguio, more so than natural increase. And there are various facilitating and pull factors, but what's important to highlight here is that it is the center of economic, educational, health, as well as government, center of administrative institutions in the Cordillera Administrative Region. And another important factor to highlight is the role of social networks and the role that they play in facilitating and supporting further migration to the city. It's also important to mention here that in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a lot of militarization in the region and also conflicts, which led to push factors that pulled people to the city of Baguio. So because of these many layers and many waves of migration from the 1900s down to the present time, we can actually conceive of the population of Baguio as being layered. So one layer would consist of the resident population. So this would include the indigenous population, the Ibaloys, and then the old-timers and their descendants. These were the old migrants who had settled in Baguio a very long time ago. And originally, most of them are from the other parts of the Cordillera region as well, and the neighboring Region 1 and other parts of Luzon. And then a layer that has added to the resident population are the newcomers. So these are the migrants that are coming from other parts of the Philippines, including faraway Mindanao, as well as some international migrants, which include the Korean population. Then there's the migrant population, which we define as those temporary migrants who stay in Baguio for a minimum of 3 months, but less than 3 years. So a lot of workers and a lot of students would fall into this category. Okay. Many of the students, for example, would, after completing their studies, might think also of settling in Baguio if ever they are able to find some employment. And so their status in the city shifts from being a migrant population, part of the migrant population, to being part of the resident population. But what makes the picture of Baguio very complicated is really the role of the transient population. So a lot of this would include tourists and also a lot of daytime as well as weekday residents. The daytime commuters as well as the weekday residents would also include a lot of workers and students who come to Baguio during the day. So these are the people, these are workers and students who live in nearby provinces and nearby areas. And then they would return to their homes either in the evening or during the weekend. And this is what the study has actually indicated as one of the policy implications, that there has to be a better understanding of population mobility and migration issues in the city of Baguio so that they can better plan for the future of the city. Okay. So Baguio had a very traumatic experience in 1990 because it was the site of an earthquake, 7.7 in magnitude, that generated a lot of destruction and also caused more than 1,600 deaths in the city. But interestingly, despite the fact that there was that, there was that very traumatic event, it did not really lead to permanent outmigration from the city, which also resonates with what has been discussed in the earlier presentations, that whenever some disaster happens, or even maybe in the case of slow onset events, migration may not necessarily be the first and the only option and adaptation that people might resort to. So what has been widely discussed in Baguio is that because of continuing migration, and for the reasons that I have cited earlier, because of the fact that it is the center of economic, political, and educational activities in the region, there had been actually a lot of policy discussions as well as discussions within the city about the future of the city due to unabated population growth. So, for example, a lot of the initiatives that have happened since the earthquake had also affected the thinking in the Philippines on how to approach disaster response and how to be prepared in case of major disasters, such as the earthquake. So actually what has happened in Baguio is that this led later on to, this has had a lot of influence in the formulation of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act of 2010, as well as the Climate Change Act also that was formulated in 2012. So various studies have been conducted noting the links between the city's population growth, mostly driven by migration, and the geohazards of the city. Very recent, and also as we can see in the context of Baguio, there had actually been a lot of response on the part of the city government to build the resilience of the city, as well as also to be able to adapt to some of the changes that have been taking place. So among others, there had been the 15-year rehabilitation plan, which was launched in January 2020. That was the most recent. They also have an environment code that was approved in 2018. And there's also the comprehensive land use plan of Baguio, which was approved also recently in 2016. And even after the study has been completed, the city has also approved the so-called local climate change adaptation plan in 2021. And this is an important landmark because it will guide the implementation of policies and programs to make the city resilient from disasters and climate change. And then most recently, there's the new charter that became a law in April 2022, which replaced the 1909 charter. So that's the runaway population, and the worries that many people have about the future of Baguio really has to do with how to manage population growth, to which migration is a great contributor. So I just like to highlight here that in our interviews, migrants and stakeholders alike noted increasing temperature and climate variability and deforestation in Baguio City. So as I mentioned, these are mostly in the area of really perceptions and understandings of what slow onset events are affecting the city. There's a lot more recognition, of course, of disasters like also flooding and landslide that would happen when Baguio would receive a lot of rain. Unfortunately, it is also one of the cities and areas in the Philippines which receive a great deal of rainfall. Migrants and stakeholders tend to link migration with climate change in Baguio through its contribution to population growth. There's also some kind of an interesting divide because it seems that residents are more aware of the city's environment-related policies more so than migrants. research participants tend to view the policies to address climate change as very much lacking, because up until now, the focus has been on responding to disasters. So there's a lot less understanding. There's also a lot less attention that has been paid to addressing slow onset events. And as mentioned earlier, there's already some recognition that some slow onset events are affecting the city, especially through such indicators as they would see as deforestation. And then the main question that was of interest to the study is to see whether understandings of climate change may lead to outmigration from Baguio City. So in this
Mala,
regard, we
1
found very
minute.
sketchy. Yes, thank you. Very sketchy evidence, because people cannot yet imagine, climate change as leading to outmigration in Baguio, because the perceptions and the understandings are more about on how migration affects climate change in the city. But there's some recognition, though, that maybe a warmer Baguio City will also mean fewer tourists. And also some understanding and some views that perhaps climate change in the lowlands and coastal areas may actually increase migration to Baguio City. In terms of policy recommendations, we had a very strong recommendation that it's very important for the city government of Baguio to adopt a migration lens in policy making. There's also a lot of scope of work to be done in terms of raising awareness on slow onset events and what would be the possible courses of action to mitigate these events. And because Baguio is such an important tourist destination, there's a great deal of scope of work that has to be done as well on responsible tourism. And a major policy recommendation that we had in order to decongest Baguio City and also to distribute development prospects in the rest of the region, then there's a need for a framework on regional development through the Baguio, La Trinidad, Itogon, Sablan, Tuba, and Tublay regional development program. I think I'll just stop at this. And thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mala. I want to thank all the 4 speakers